joining us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline to talk some EAGLES, the reigning, defending Philadelphia Eagles. Little love from one Paul Heyman today there, John.
Yeah, how about that?
I saw this morning, I woke up, I said, what the heck is this? Heyman Hustle retweeted something, and I sure enough said, wow, he retweeted John McMullen.
Yeah, well, I'm the reigning, defending roster prediction champion of the Eagles beat writers. So I was having a little fun with that. And I said, where's Heyman Hustle when you need him? And all of a sudden, he helped me out.
There he was.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Follow John on Twitter at JF McMullen for that. We got the NFL reporting. Some teams are in. Eagles later on in the week here. We know that the Ravens have been in action, the teams that are playing in the Hall of Fame game as well. And we'll dive into some Eagles stuff throughout this week as, all the previews at 97.3 ESPN.com. But I find that Ravens story to be kind of interesting. I've been reading that, Lamar Jackson is way ahead of the curve. Now they're not rolling out using both quarterbacks there. I know Flacco seems to be the guy, and we touched on this the other day about, you never want your, the incumbent never wants to have the rookie coming in there to take your job. But it's going to be pretty interesting to see how long the Ravens or how mediocre they can be before they decide, we might need a spark.
Well, I think a lot of it does depend on how long they are contenders, and that's one of the reasons why I don't believe Lamar's going to see the field much at all this year, barring injuries, of course. You always have to say that, but that's because I think Baltimore's going to be a capable team. I'm not saying they're going to be great, but they're going to be in the playoff hunt throughout, and because of that, there's going to be no reason to pull the trigger. We talked about it a lot with the Eagles last year, Darren Sproles, Donnell Pumphrey. Can they get them on the field at the same time? The Ravens are talking about playing two quarterbacks. That's camp talk when you get into the regular season.
Right.
And the games start, and there's serious situations. That's not going to happen. Let's be realistic. If you don't have one quarterback, the old cliche, you don't have any.
Right. They have three.
If you have a quarterback controversy. Yeah, they have Robert Griffin III as well. But as I said, Joe Flacco's contract, it doesn't permit them to move on, makes over $20 million a year. You're not going to pay that to a backup. Now, they could do it for 1 year. If they're 4-12 and they're on the way there, yeah, at some point he's going to get on the field. But that's a good football team. They're not going to be on the way to 4-12. They're going to be in it, and for that reason, Joe is going to be the starting quarterback if he's healthy.
I just wonder the Deshaun Watson factor. A guy who came in that a lot of people didn't know what he would be. They gave him an opportunity, and he really – took that team. Now, I agree with you. If the Ravens are – but my question really is, what would the Ravens' record need to be? Are they 2-6 before they pull the plug? Are they 4-4 and say we're better than that? That's where I'm intrigued.
Yeah, I think more the former 2-6, something like that, and that's just not realistic. They're too good. They're not going to be 2-6. If you are 4-4, you're still in the hunt for a wild card spot. So I don't even think that does it. And that's one of the issues. And you also have to look at the other quarterback. Remember, in Deshaun Watson's case, the other quarterback was Tom Savage. Well, there's a big difference between Tom Savage and Joe Flacco. Joe's very capable. Look, he hasn't been the same since he injured himself, but he has won a Super Bowl. I'm on in Baltimore radio all the time. Those people are frustrated. A lot of people want to move on from Joe Flacco, but John Harbaugh knows he's still a capable quarterback, and there's a big difference. They're not gonna race to get Lamar Jackson on the field because you're going to have those growing pains. And by the way, the second part would be that Lamar's not as good as Deshaun. That's the big second part. So I think he needs some time to sort of ramp up, and I've said it since they drafted him. I think it's the perfect situation for him to be able to sit back and learn for a year and then come in and compete next year.
John, you mentioned that you list it right now at 97.3 ESPN.com, the projected Eagles 53-man roster. So let's kind of take our first dive into that. They will be getting to camp later on in this week. The quarterback situation, we know Carson Wentz, Nick Foles, Nate Sudfeld, they would be the three guys there. They got to feel pretty good about that room, with the obvious story being, when will Carson Wentz be ready?
Yeah, I mean, that is it's the best quarterback room in football. There's no question about it. I laugh. Mac Hollins said the MVP, the Super Bowl MVP, and the future MVP. That's how he described it. It's a little bit of a hyperbole, but if you look around this league, nobody has a better situation at the quarterback position than the Philadelphia Eagles, and that's obviously very important. And we'll see better. First practice is Thursday at noon. I don't expect Carson Wentz to be cleared at that point, but we'll get to speak to Doug Peterson after the practice, get a little update. Remember, he doesn't have to give injury updates at this time of year, but he'll kind of let us know if there's any setbacks with Carson Wentz, and I don't expect there to be. So week one is still the plan for Carson Wentz.
You've got 5 running backs listed: Ajayi, Clement, Sproles, Pumphrey, and Matt Jones, the former Redskin, making the list. Pumphrey, another guy who, you know, is a wild card with his stature. You think he could make a big jump, I guess, this year to make the team. He was not ready last year. So 5 running backs. What's the storylines there?
Yeah, I think the biggest storyline there is 2019, believe it or not. We know that the committee this year is going to be Ajayi, Corey Clement, and Darren Sproles. But we also know Darren Sproles is going to retire after this season, and that's where Donnell Pumphrey potentially fits in. You need to see incremental improvement. He's got to be a lot better than last year's training camp. I expect him to show some improvement. The Eagles believe eventually he can turn into sort of a third down back in this league. And then Jay Ajayi's in his walk year. And even with a good year, I'm not sure the Eagles want to sign him. I'm not sure they want to pay him a lot of money. We've talked about that a lot, the position as a whole, how it's devalued, how running backs don't make a lot of money. And teams don't want to pay running backs a lot of money. So I'm not sure, even with a good season, the Eagles will want to re-sign Jay Ajayi. And in that case, you need a new lead back. And Matt Jones has the talent to be that. Now, I don't want to overstate it. If he goes into the preseason games and he fumbles once, he's probably going to get cut. But I think if he can show that he can hold on to the football, he's got more talent than a guy like Wendell Smallwood. I think he's got a chance to make this team with an eye on 2019.
The wide receivers, you have 5 listed. Now, typically, this has been a weak area for the Eagles. We've been trying to search for wideouts for each of the last, it seems like, 10 years after the Deshaun Jackson and Jeremy Maclin. It was, you know, who are some of these guys? And, oh, this guy is, you know, Mr. Lehigh Basket, and we had Paul Turners of the world. This group seems to
Paul
be
Turner.
Right, exactly. You remember him, right? He was the guy.
Oh yeah, all the fans wanted Paul Turner.
Exactly. This group seems to be a lot more locked in at camp. You've got 5: Jeffrey Aguilar, Mike Wallace, Mac Hollins, and 2017 draft choice Shelton Gibson.
Yeah, I think the top 4 is locked in. And the question is, if you only keep 5, typically the 5th receiver's got to help on special teams, and that's where Shelton Gibson has the advantage over guys like Marcus Wheaton, Greg Ward, who the Eagles like a lot, and that's why I have him in that 5th slot. There's no question Wheaton's the best receiver of that bunch on the back end, and Ward, a former quarterback at Houston, trying to make the transition. Looks like he could be a solid slot receiver in this league, but I think you could get him on the practice squad again. So when you do build these rosters, I'll remind people I'm the reigning defending champion, Mike. When you do build these rosters, you have to also look at who's going to be on the practice squad. So they're probably going to keep 2 receivers on the practice squad. You could get a guy like Ward through waivers and get him on there.
Tight end, a position of strength last year, specifically with Ertz, and Trey Burton is no longer here. Brent Selleck is no longer here. It's a different look in that room. Ertz is still at the top of the depth chart, but a rookie in Dallas Goedert and a veteran in Richard Rodgers. Is the tight end position similar, better, worse than last year?
Well, I think it's got a chance to be better. Dallas Goedert's just got much more talent, much higher upside than Trey Burton. And Richard Rodgers, although he's not as good as a player as Brent Selleck when Brent Selleck was in his prime, he's a better player than Brent Selleck was last year, who Brent was on the descent, wasn't nearly as capable as he once was. So I think this group has a chance. It's very different, obviously, but it has a chance to be better. Ertz is a Pro Bowl level tight end, and Goddard, if he can, we've talked about that some in the offseason as well. If he can pick up the NFL game quickly, that's going to be interesting, because having him and Ertz on the field at the same time when you're using 2 tight ends, boy, they're both big, lengthy, fast guys. It's gonna be a matchup nightmare for defenses.
John, the offensive line last year was probably the best in football. Kelsey, Brooks, Wisniewski, Johnson, Peters. When they got that group together, finally with Wisniewski, after trying just about every way not to get him on the field, they finally tapped out and put him in. And then they lost Peters and had to go to Vaitai. Warmack was a guy who got a chance at left guard. Sayamala started the season there. And, they kind of persevered through it. This line, virtually the same, and the depth seems to be very similar. So we shouldn't expect much of a drop-off from the Eagles' O-line?
No, it should be better, because Jason Peters is back, and he'll be the left tackle. And as good a job as Big V did in replacing him last season, they're just not similar. Even at 36 years old, Jason's a much better player. And then you have Vaitai moving into that game day swing tackle position, which is very important. And all you have to do is look to Dallas in the division. We all know how good Tyron Smith is. He might be the best left tackle in football. But when the Cowboys lost him, you saw what happened. Their entire offense imploded because they couldn't find even a capable left tackle to block anybody, and Adrian Claiborne had that 6-sack game. They couldn't block anybody. Well, the Eagles have Vaitai, and he's already proven by definition he's good enough to win a Super Bowl with. So that's pretty impressive depth. And then you mentioned Wisniewski. I think the Eagles, the problem and the reason they waited so long is because he's so versatile. He can play center, he can play left guard, he can play right guard, and pretty much seamlessly at each of those positions. That's so valuable as a reserve. They kind of wanted him in that position. And you have to think about it in a different way. Let him start at left guard, and if there is an injury at center or right guard, you can move him in game. So it's the same kind of depth. It's just coming from a different spot. So when you talk about Vaitai and Wisniewski as your depth pieces and their ability on the outside and the interior respectively, that's pretty good. Yeah. And most teams don't have that kind of depth.
We're breaking down John's 53-man projections. You can see them all at 97.3ESPN.com. Would you say the offense as a whole will be a better unit than last year? They lost Burton. They lost Blunt. What else? They're adding maybe a full season of Wentz. We don't know. Obviously, these are all injury things.
Well,
they're getting a
full season of Ajayi, and they're getting Jason Peters back for a full season. So on paper, they should be better. You have the second season. Remember, Alshon Jeffrey played hurt last year. He should be back and healthy from the shoulder surgery, ready to go. And it's his second year in the offense, second year for Nelson Aguilar in the slot. Mike Wallace is better than Torrey Smith. So on paper, it should be better. But the one question is, how does Carson Wentz come off the ACL and the LCL? He's going to be wearing a brace. There's going to be at least a little bit of a difference as far as the mobility goes.
Yeah.
So that's the big question.
Well, Brady's worst season.
The same guy.
Brady's worst season was his following the ACL. McNabb's worst season was, well, worst season in Philly anyway, was the one following the ACL. So it seems that it does take, mortal. It turns you somewhat mortal, that ACL injury.
Yeah, it generally does take 2 full years, and a lot of it's the mental hurdle bigger than the physical one. But you mentioned Brady, and remember, Brady's a pocket quarterback. He's not moving around. He's not tremendously mobile. Never was. Carson is. That's a big part of his game, and that's not going to be as good, that mobility, as it was before the injury, at least early. So a lot of it depends on how he handles it and how he changes his game and how he makes up for that little downtick in mobility.
Defense, real quick. Let's the line. You've got Graham, Fletcher, Nada, Michael Bennett, Derek Barnett, Chris Long, Josh Sweat, Destiny Vallejo, Elijah Qualls, Steven Means, and then Jernigan is on the injured list to start the year. But that's 10 guys, all all have a story and are pretty interesting. But defensive front, better than last year or worse?
It's better. It's more talented. I mean, Jernigan puts a little bit of a crimp in it. If he was there, I'd say no question it's better. And, he's expected to be out at least at the start of the season. Saw him in the offseason, was moving well, but you can't really gauge to say that he's ahead of schedule or not. I think Nada can still play and still be a really good run stuffer. And what helps is Brandon Graham and Michael Bennett both have the versatility to play inside in nickel packages when you're rushing. So they have versatility. And as I said, I mean, Vinny Curry and Bo Allen were good players. But if you look at their replacements, Michael Bennett's better than Vinny Curry. Haloti Ngata's better than Bo Allen. So when Tim Jernigan gets back, if he's able to get back and he's healthy, that's the deepest line in the NFL last year is even better than it was last year.
Maybe a place that's not so deep is linebacker Hicks, Corey Nelson, Camus, Nate Geary, Leroy Reynolds. Nigel Bradham will be suspended for game number 1, and Paul Warlow, who we know they brought in, he's out with an ACL. Not a lot of names that are jumping off the page.
No, and remember, that's only the first game because Nigel will be back, and that's very big because they have 2 linebackers. They have 2 proven linebackers, and that's it. And that is, if you're looking for one potential issue with this team, that's the one that really starts glaring out at you. There's just not a lot there. And you can cross your fingers and hope Corey Nelson can handle the role as he moved from safety, was a safety at Nebraska. This will be his second year. We'll see if he can take a big step forward. And Camus and Leroy Reynolds, those are basically special teams guys. You don't want them playing on the base defense. Not a lot of depth at that position.
No. When I read through those names just to refresh myself, I said, I felt like Major League. Who are these guys? Corey Nelson, Camus, Ruger Hill, Nate Geary, Leroy Reynolds. I mean, that's if you're going to some of those guys, and somebody of that group is going to play, unless they go out when some roster cuts are made and go at a guy. All right, corner, Mills, Darby, Jones, Douglas, Maddox, Bosby. They're the guys that you have at corner. That's 6. If we were having this conversation last year, we would say this is the weakest spot on the team. It seems that it might be one of the strongest now.
Yeah, it is. And remember, they're all young as well. We'll all have our eyes on Sidney Jones early because he, again, was injured. At least, Doug called it lower body soreness. Missed a number of the off-season practices, I think the last 5. So we'll have to see if he can be healthy. But even without him, I mean, they proved that they were capable. And with them, with that kind of talent, there's a potential to take that next step. Mills can play. We know that now. Darby can play. Rasul Douglas, as I said, is capable and should improve a lot in the second year. And then you have a rookie with promise in Avonte Maddox, and Devontae Ballsby was the offseason star. I think that Bradham suspension will enable them to keep the sixth corner at least for week one, because as I said at 973ESPN.com, you look at the team they're playing, it's Atlanta. What do you need against Atlanta? They're going to be playing three wide receivers all the time. You need corners. So I think at least early you're going to see all six of them make the team.
Another area of, I don't want to say concern, but definitely a glaring lack of depth might be safety. With Jenkins and McLeod is definitely the two superior starters. Trey Sullivan and Chris Maragos are the two guys that you have listed as making the team. We have heard about Corey Graham, who was still unsigned and could potentially be brought in here. But if they don't bring another guy in and there's an injury at safety, you might be in some trouble.
Yeah, and I keep waiting for the text to come across with the Eagles bringing back Corey Graham. He indicated he wanted to play, continue to play. I know Jim Schwartz likes him a lot. They do have some confidence in Trey Sullivan. But I talked to Tim Hawk, the safeties coach, and he said he was honest. He said it's really tough to trust a young player who hasn't done it before. When you're talking about a guy like Corey Graham who's won 2 Super Bowls and understands the defense and understands where he needs to be. So, yeah, I mean, we talked about linebacker, and then third safety would be the second spot. That if you look at this team as a whole, which might be the most talented in the NFL, and you are looking for holes, that's where you start. You start at linebacker, and you start at that third safety position.
And then the specialist, Elliott, Cam Johnson, eyes will be on him, obviously, the new punter, and Rick Lovato, who took over for John Dornbos as the 3 specialists. And Elliott was a major surprise as the kicker last year.
Yeah, I mean, he had a lot of talent. Obviously, anytime you get drafted as a kicker, and he was a 5th-round pick, that means you're pretty good coming out. But obviously, he got beat out by Randy Bullock in Cincinnati. The Eagles had the injury that Caleb Sturgis brought him in. And I argue, I say it all the time, Mike, when this team took off, it was the 61-yard field goal by Jake Elliott. And all of a sudden, they turned from a team that was okay. Remember, the New York Giants weren't a very good football team, and they were leaking oil in that game. Giants were coming back. They had a lot of injuries on defense, and Jake Elliott kind of saved it with that field goal. And the Eagles really never looked back from there. It was the start of everything. So I think he's got the potential to be the kicker around here for a long time. And obviously the leg strength is there. And that's what they're trying to do at punter. Donnie Jones, obviously an aging guy, and they want the big-legged young guy, and that's Cam Johnson, who was here last year, almost beat out Donnie. And this time around, he's got a chance to seize the job.
All right, it all starts Thursday, and you can read the full layout from Johnny Mack at 973ESPN.com. All right, John, take care, pal.
All right, thanks, Mike.